Hi, Daily Dosers. My name's Paige Payne. I work here on the Vista campus in student ministries, and I am excited, might be the right word, to get to bring you the Daily Dose this morning on this really interesting topic of judgment. Good morning, good times. Okay, so essentially it's been really cool to get to hear how this series has started off and getting to talk about what judgment is and really kind of being able to see it through a lens of using wisdom and discernment as we gently and lovingly correct one another towards holiness and righteousness. And it's a very good biblical concept that we talk about, that we can use God's words to rebuke and encourage and correct and actually put one another in a position before Christ that says, yeah, we're standing with him and we're standing together before him. And so this whole quarantine, man, I know that we all kind of spend different times in different texts and whatever, but for whatever reason, these past couple of months, I've really been sitting in the book of Hebrews, and I've just been really encouraged by it. And one of those themes that comes up over and over and over again through the book of Hebrews is this urging, is this pleading, is this encouraging that would we actually stand together and make sure that none of us fall short of what God has called us to, that we could all stand at the end face to face with Christ, that he would say, I know you, and that we've actually stuck it out to the end, that we haven't fallen into this world's deceitfulness. And even just like one of these verses that shows us that is in chapter 3, and it says, see to it, brothers and sisters, that none of you has a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God, but encourage one another daily so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. And just that call of would we see the things that actually people are being deceived by? Would we use that judgment? Would we use that discernment to call one another towards that? And yet later on in this book, we get to a really powerful verse in chapter 12 that reminds us that judgment, while it can be used for discernment, while it can be used for wisdom and correction and rebuking out of love that we would all be standing with Christ in the end, it's never meant to actually cause in us a level of hurt, bitterness, or unforgiveness that just sits there and dwells in us. And so here's this verse from chapter 12 of Hebrews, verses 14 and 15. It says this: make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy. Kind of like what we're talking about. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. But as we push one another towards holiness, it's actually out of the most loving thing that we would be able to see the Lord. That's the most loving thing that we could want for one another. And then the verse continues and it says, see to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and to defile many. And what I've noticed a lot about the things that I personally feel like I have the right to judge someone on, or to call someone on, or to rebuke someone, or to correct someone, or that I all of a sudden feel that this is something necessary worth talking about, is often something that has personally offended or hurt me. And really what that does is, while there might be a place where I'm actually able to come from love and graciously talk through that and graciously rebuke and correct and even maybe be corrected on, that can be done in love. And yet often what actually sits behind is still a little bit of bitterness, and is still a little bit of hurt, and still unforgiveness that actually just sits there and dwells. And I let that kind of stir and sit out of this bitter root judgment. And something that happens with fruit that's grown from a bitter root or a bitter seed is that it actually takes the length of that fruit to grow and actually be exposed and bitten into to realize that it's actually a bitter fruit. And what we realize is that after time, weeks, months, years, however long we've let this bitterness sit there, that when it's exposed, we realize that it's actually affected us that whole time, that it's actually been something that we've allowed to sit and to stir, that's hardened our hearts towards the love that we're called to. And specifically, it says here that no one would fall short of the grace of God, that as we're exercising wisdom and judgment and discernment and those kinds of things, would we also remember that every single person here is a recipient of God's grace, that we don't get to determine who's worth it and who's not. And as I sit in God's grace, that's actually something that's extended to other people. So do we be people who's not just sitting in bitter root judgment that's dwelling in our hearts, but through this process, would we also be people who are extending grace graciously and exuberantly and abundantly as we kind of walk through this judgment process together? Thanks, Daily Dosers.